that might hit me as a bombshell. It's the same town. I just thought there were many towns with that name. You see what I mean? So it's not confined to Dickens and fiction kind of cases. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, once you have, I mean, this is what I mean. I think that's a real question. Once you have it, that you're puzzled about this, right? Then you're off in this problem. How can you ever take it for granted that two uses of a name refer to the same thing? I mean, anytime a doubt is raised, you can settle it. As you say, is London London? You say, yes, London is London, right? But once you have that question in your mind, then it's never going to be a truth of logic that two different uses of the same name refer to the same thing. It would be different if we had a description theory. It would be much easier if we had a description theory. Because then, what would fix the reference would be the general terms associated with this name and the general terms associated with that name. And if I just thought about it, I would be able to tell it was the same general terms associated with the two names. So then I could just think, well, it's the same cluster of descriptions associated with this name as with that name. So the reference is being fixed in the same way. So if either of them refers to anything, they must refer to the same thing. It's much easier in the description theory. Then you can see how the identity is uninformative. Right? I mean, if I use the name Bright, and I say, that's going to refer to the inventor of the wheel, and I use the name Wheel, and I say, that's going to refer to the inventor of the wheel, and I say, is Bright wheel? Is that informative or uninformative that Bright is wheel? It's uninformative, right? Because I just fixed it both by the same description. You see what I mean? So they've got to refer to the same thing. So in a description theory, it's easy to see how you get uninformative identities. On a causal theory, the thing seems completely impossible. How do you guys feel about that? Are you on board?
Yeah. It's causing some noise in my understanding. There's two different levels that we can talk about. One is the level of what would really logically follow, and the other is the level of what kind of inference would be like allowed or justified in making.
Yeah.
The knowledge of the premises. And what's just confusing me a little bit is that those seem to maybe come apart in the London case. If I really don't know that Dickens' London is the real London, then me knowing that London is F and London is V doesn't really allow me to infer that London is F and G. And so there's not a problem on that level for me that what I can be able to correctly infer is not maybe having on to what's possibly valid.
Right, so let me play that back to you and see if I understood it. I think that's an interesting move. So that's to say that you get this inference, A is F, A is G, so A is both F and G, then you might say, well, that's really valid. But whether I know it's valid, that's a different question. Is that right?
Right.
Right. And so if I got the London inference, then that might really be valid, but I just might know it's valid. Yeah. Yeah, I see that. That's a good move. But
I don't mean to be advocating, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's fair enough. I think the thing is, though, that the way we usually think of a valid argument is if you know the premises, you know the conclusion. Yeah. That's to say, the whole point of argument in everyday life is you're trying to prove something to me, and you say, look, you agreed at P, right? And I say, well, all right, I suppose so. And you say, you agreed at Q, right? And I say, well, I suppose so. And you say, but now R follows from P and Q. And I say, well, that's all right. I'll take your word for it. And you say, so now you have to accept that R. And I say, no. Whether it's logically valid is one thing, and whether I know the conclusion on the basis of the premises, that's a different thing. I mean, the whole point of an argument is to take you from a valid argument, is to take you from knowledge of the premises to knowledge of the conclusion. Do you see what I mean? There's that notion of an argument, a valid argument, as having to do with what you can know on the basis of what. And I think Frege's picture of uninformativeness is that kind of epistemic notion. It's both logical and epistemic. But there's room for more discussion there. Okay, I think this formally wraps up uninformativeness and causal theories. Are you comfortable with what? This is what I got to anyway. And you remember this case, the Isaac Bashir Singer case? That's just more of the same. Yeah. He meets his wife, the woman who is in fact his wife, and he's saying, you're called Mary Ellen. That's funny, my wife's Mary Ellen too. So the identity, Mary Ellen, is Mary Ellen. Should be uninformative, but it's going to hit him like a bomb. Right? Okay. Evans and dominant source. I just want to go over this. How it applies to natural kind terms. This is probably the most famous, this is quite a famous example from that Evans article. In the case of the name Madagascar, a hearsay report of Malay or Arab sailors misunderstood by Marco Polo has had the effect of transferring a corrupt form of the name of a portion of the African mainland to the great African island. So the story is something like Marco Polo is pointing to the big island across the water and saying, what's that called? And the natives all think he's pointing to some bit of the mainland, and they say, that's Madagascar. Or Low Madagascar, or whatever they were saying. And he says, Madagascar, is that right? And writes down the big island is called Madagascar. Right? Now, notice something about this case. He intends to refer to the same thing that they do. He's not trying to be creative. He's not saying, Madagascar, that's a good name for an island. Let's call that island Madagascar. He's just trying to find out what the locals call the island. Right? So when he uses the name Madagascar, he intends to refer to the same thing that they do. Okay? So if they baptized the portion of the mainland Madagascar, he intends to refer to the same thing that they're referring to. So on Kripke's account, what preservation of reference, what referring to the same thing requires is that you have a causal chain and an intention to preserve reference. That's the way it goes in Kripke. But this example shows that's a mistake, because you can be trying to refer to the same thing, but the reference shifts on you, though you didn't realize it. And what is going on is that there's a shift in the dominant source of the information associated with the name. The way the locals use the name Madagascar, all the information associated with the name, dominant, whether it's right or wrong, the dominant source is that portion of the mainland. But once Marco Polo starts using it, the dominant source of the information associated with the name, right or wrong, is a large African island. Okay? So when there's that shift in dominant source, then reference can shift. This is, of course, a point that's come up many times. Most notably in the affecting story of Spot, right? That story of Spot is actually kind of basic. Lots of these examples are built around it. So if you're going to keep referring to the same thing, you've got to keep the same dominant source for the body of information associated with the name. I mean, a way to put the thing about uninformativeness is it's hard to see how it can be a priori that you're managing to do that. And then Putnam's stuff about Earth and Twin Earth, what the model is of the Earth and Twin Earth stories, you can put Putnam's thing in terms of Evans' notion of dominant source. When you shift from Earth to Twin Earth, on Twin Earth, there's a dossier of information associated with the sign, water, And on Earth, there's a dossier of information associated with the sign water, but the dominant source of the information in the two dossiers is different. In one case it's H2O, in the other case it's XYZ. That's how come the two terms refer to different things. So Putnam gives this explanation in terms of, Putnam had given this explanation in terms of the stuff around here, or the stuff around here, right? But you don't need to give that kind of explanation. The important thing is the dominant source of the information associated with the use of the sign. And then if you travel slowly, if you travel from one planet to the other, then the reference shifts slowly because the dominant source of the associated information shifts slowly. And that's how you can have these unintended shifts of reference if the dominant source is shifting without you realizing it. You can be trying to keep referring to it. That's what happens with Spot. You're trying to keep referring to the same thing, but the dominant source of your information is shifting without you realizing it. So we don't need this kind of Kripke approach to natural kind terms where you say, I baptize this stuff water, I baptize this stuff gold, and then there's a causal chain with an intention to preserve reference. That's Kripke's account. What we really need is that notion of the dominant source of the information associated with the sign. We can explain all the phenomena in those terms. If I've explained everything right, this should be just wrapping up stuff, points that you're comfortable with. You're completely comfortable with that? Yep. That's right. Well, what I mean is, the idea here is that if I want to know what the word water, as we use it now, refers to, right? On Kripke's picture, you're going to find a causal chain from our current usage of the term water back to an initial dubbing, right? So there's going to be that chain where everyone in the chain was intending to refer to the same thing as everyone else in the chain, yeah? And then that's going to be going back to that initial baptism, which might have been hundreds of years ago. And the point is, there's something fantastical about that idea. I mean, who cares whether we're referring to hundreds of years ago, this initial baptism? What matters is, what's the dominant source of the information we currently associate with the sign? It's what's going on now that matters for the reference to the sign now. And you don't need this kind of historical thing going back over possibly many centuries. Okay? And just to wrap up on where we've got to so far, I want to say something about the difference between causal theories of reference and cluster theories of reference. Where we began so long ago, right at the start of term, was we were asking, how does language work? How does the machine get going? What's going on with language anyway? And we said, well, what is a language? Well, I said a language is when you've got sentences that can be true or false. If you've got something that's got structured sentences with singular terms and general terms, and you put them together and you get something that can be right or wrong, then you've got a language. And so then if you take the very simplest case, Sally is tall, that kind of case, then you can say, well, if we've got Sally referring to something in the world, if Sally is connected up to a particular concrete object, and the predicate is tall is connected up to some property that objects have, then you can say, as a result of those bits and pieces being hooked up to aspects of the world, that whole sentence can be right or wrong. That's where we began. And now the causal theory is really trying to do something very fundamental. It's trying to tell you how the whole business gets moving in the first place. When you have this sign causally connected to a particular object, when you have is tall causally connected to a particular property, then you're going to get standards of right or wrong for sentences. That's what the causal theory is telling you, the basis of these standards of right and wrong, where they come from. They come from your relations to your surroundings. So Sally refers to the dominant source of the dossier of information associated with the name, and is tall is going to apply to an object just if that object has the property that's the dominant source of the dossier of information associated with the predicate tall. That's how it'll be working. But once you state that, that seems really baffling. What just happened? Because all you've got is a causal connection. Look, call out a letter of the alphabet. Will somebody do me a favor and call out a letter of the alphabet? H, okay, there we go. Okay, you just, whoever it was that you? Right, just produced a sound, right? I just made a sign. There's a causal connection between the two. That doesn't mean that there's some standard of right or wrong here. Yeah? Suppose you do it again, call out the H. Now get a G, right? Now what caused me to do that G was I thought, whatever letter he produces, I'm going to produce the one before it, right? So there's a causal connection here, but are there any standards of right or wrong associated with my use of G and H? No. Yeah, I mean, that's just one sign was produced and the other sign was produced. So there's a causal connection here between Sally, between the person Sally and the sign Sally. But how does that generate standards of right and wrong? I mean, after all, whenever any sign is produced, there's going to be some cause for that sign being produced. Why does that mean that right and wrong are getting into the picture? How come we're talking about truth and falsity here at all? The causal theory is saying the relevant relations here are causal connections. That's how language gets going. But there are causal connections between the movements of the distant stars and the movements of the Earth in the solar system. That doesn't mean there's anything right or wrong about the movements of the Earth in the solar system. So this is a very difficult theory to see why it's connected, why causality has been connected to the basis of the standards of right or wrong for sentences. It's trying to be a very fundamental theory here, but it's difficult to see why it's working. When you think about the cluster theory yourself in a cluster theory descriptions or the causal theory, then there are lots of detailed discussions you can have about each theory. You can ask, well, does the theory get right the references of the names? Does the causal theory get right the reference of the name Madagascar? Does the cluster theory get right the reference of the name Gödel? Or you can ask, can the description theory explain rigidity? Can the causal theory explain rigidity? Can the causal theory explain rigidity? Oh, wait a minute, can the description theory explain rigidity? Put up your hand if you think the causal theory can explain rigidity. And if you think it can't? Okay, well, you guys are right. But, okay, Kripke's objection to the description theory was it can't explain rigidity. Remember that stuff? Gore, president of the US in 2000, right? You remember that? Poor old Al. Yeah? So the description, president of the US in 2000, when you move from world to world, that fits different people. Right? In some worlds there is Al fitting the description. But the name Al Gore always refers to the same object in different possible worlds. You've heard this before. I promise you, you've heard this before. Okay. Anyway, I just want to leave that as homework. Whether the causal theory can actually explain rigidity. Clicky's got this argument that the description theory can't explain rigidity. It seems to be a good question whether the causal theory is any better off than the description theory in that respect. But I'll leave that as an exercise. They actually are radically different kinds of theory, it seems to me, the cluster theory and the causal theory. The cluster theory is explaining how names refer in terms of other parts of language, general terms, and predicates like I and now and here. But why would you do that? Why would you bother explaining how names refer by connecting them up to the functioning of predicates? Why bother explaining one part of language in terms of another? The causal theory is trying to connect the use of language to something that lies outside language, these causal connections between the environment and the signs. It's trying to explain right and wrong for signs in terms that don't presuppose meaning or representation at all. We should go for a more ambitious theory, if we can. And we want to know how representation happens in general, not just explaining one part of language in terms of another. Okay, I'll talk some more about the kind of general perspective on all the details we've had so far on Friday, and then we'll move on to Putnam and Brains and Facts.